This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. So, I think maybe it might be time to consider changing our approach, or my approach. This is what I wanted to talk about anyway. I'm not trying to preach it to you. To building Helix presets. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So, back maybe 3-4 years ago, there was a Yamaha 612 Pacifica launch. And I went to a place in London. I think this might have been during lockdown, maybe in November or something like that. And I got asked if I would, go to London and film a bit of an intro. And I was doing kind of a looping thing with just the Helix and the power cab and the Yamaha Pacifica, and plugged in the power cab for the first time. And I noticed there was like this kind of ground loop hum type thing happening. I couldn't really identify where it was. I think at the time I had something based roughly on, one of the templates. There's the 2 tones presets. Which basically uses up all of the processing lanes essentially, and has lots of stuff turning on and off, and 2 amps in the signal chain and all that gubbins. When I got home from that, I actually kind of thought, yes, the litigator and some of the other clean amps actually have like this hum thing built in, and there is a hum and a ripple where you can affect both those things. And probably if I'd had a bit of a simpler preset, I might have found that there and then. Another thing is that obviously when we're playing live, I think it's a fairly good idea to have a preset that you know really well, and in essence it's quite difficult to know a preset really well if there's a load of changes that are hidden within snapshots. So I think snapshots are a really, really good thing. And for me, there are some presets that I'm really, really happy with. But I think in general, as a practice, trying to keep things simpler might be a good starting point. And then maybe use your snapshots and adjusting things per snapshot as a kind of way to refine a preset rather than kind of starting off with that as the baseline, if that makes sense. I can remember listening to a Julian Lage interview with, I think, Cordy, and he was talking about how sometimes he'll plug something between his Telecaster and his Champ, and he'll kind of enjoy it for a bit and then quite quickly go back to just guitar straight into amp because he prefers the purity of that, the immediacy, and he even said himself maybe it's a bit of placebo as well. But I think in the modelling world we have a tendency, because we have a certain amount of things available, we always want to kind of test the limits. Not we, but me particularly, testing the limits. I can use as much as I like, why not? But in this video I wanted to explore the idea of why it might be worth kind of paring things back a bit, and in this intro I was using just the Nashville prize drive, so what's that called, the Nobles ODR1, into the Matchless Channel 1, into a cab, and then a reverse delay on the bottom, and I think just a plate reverb. So good run on an HX Stomp, and I think this is another thing that for me, I use the HX Stomp quite a lot more than the full Helix, so in any case I'm used to building a slightly less complex preset, but kind of, yeah, taking it a little bit back closer towards what the old school might be, where you might have a couple of pedals and an amp, see what that yields. I don't know if that's interesting to you. The Legato merch is not selling like hotcakes, but if you ever wanted to support the channel in the form of merch, I have made it specifically niche enough that you probably won't want to anyway. So I'm going to show you, or maybe just build a preset with you now instead, which is kind of more around the idea of keeping things a little bit simple, because there's a couple of reasons. I think it's easier if you're going to be gigging this thing to figure out what you've done. And this is a thing for me that it took me time over the years. I can remember way back when I did a Yamaha Pacifica demo, maybe something a bit like this, and this is kind of the preset that I uploaded as my artist preset, where we got two things going on. We got two parallel lines, and essentially the clean, when I want this path to go off, the snapshot sends it down to 0. When I got drive, there's a snapshot with different drive settings for every snapshot. I think I'm using the same cab for each, but it looks like the low cut is changing as well. So a thing where it's like, if you wanted to make one tweak to it, where would you start? And I think that's maybe a place that you guys have found yourself before. And I was reading the comments over on the Helix Facebook group, which I suggest is quite a cool place to hang out if you're looking for tips and stuff like that, or have questions. But he was asking about, for example, I think the Matchless Channel 1 amplifier, which was in his preset, and he had the Channel 1 drive kind of here. Actually, let's do this in an amp block. Channel 1, and then I'll add a cab. So cab wise, let's go for a dual cab, match H30, and then this one we'll use the G25. But yeah, what he was finding was that even with the Channel 1 drive at 2.5, he was not getting clean tones as much as he'd like. And I was like, okay, well, it's a Vox style amplifier, so it's going to be kind of geared towards breakup, depending on what guitar you're plugging into it. And then I said, actually, have you got anything in front of it? And he said, yes, I've got a deluxe comp. So looked at his deluxe comp, and his level on the deluxe comp was +7, which is default. So again, that's given me particularly if I make any changes to here. Definitely, I could be gearing myself up to be more likely to essentially goose the front of that amp, maybe unintentionally. I'm using a compressor, but here I'm kind of using it as a boost at the same time, right? And so by doing something that isn't as simple, he's actually ended up with a result that he didn't want. And in which case, I think maybe it's worth investigating, like, what's the least amount of stuff that you might need to get the tone that you're looking for. So maybe we even get rid of the dual cab, and I'm gonna try some things which normally work quite well for me. So the 67 condenser position around 3.9, and me personally, I tend to set this high cut generally between 4 and 8. So let's go for 6. As a starting point. And then another thing I think is that instead of starting with the default settings, I sometimes think it might be worth starting somewhere else. So for me, with a Vox style amp, I'll bring the cut down, because I think actually that's where quite a lot of the tone in Vox style amps is. Presence, I'll just leave where it is. But yeah, bass at 5, treble at 5, cut, turn that off. I wouldn't really start off in these sag or bias settings. Those are quite subtle in many ways. But let's now add in something else. So a stereo reverb can help. Glitz is one that I really like. A lot of settings again, but for me, what I like to do really is keep the mix sort of between 15 and 20. Okay, right, what else could we do to kind of make this happen? I think Air Apparent is a good pair with the Vox style amp. With boost here, keep the presence nice and low. That's an internal trim pot on the actual pedal itself. Maybe boost the level. It depends what you're looking for, I guess. But so that's a relatively simple setup that can take me. But start off with a really simple kind of platform to start with before you go into adding other bits and pieces, maybe. For me, I always pretty much like to add in a stereo delay as part of my kind of core lead tone and that sort of stuff. My settings would look something like this. Again, mixes towards the lower end, sort of between 15 and 20. I wouldn't have modulation on it. Particularly for live stuff, you maybe think about, do I even need a reverb? And for me, maybe a delay would be a better thing for that. But for instance, if we're going to start building our lead snapshot, I might kick on this. And I might consider, right, do I take advantage of being able to up the drive on here? But this is where we start to then get into the realms, well, in a live situation, I've got a couple of different things to manage here. If I up the gain, then I'm probably going to need to drop the channel volume to compensate. And then alongside that, typically if I up the gain that amount, I would also drop the high cut a little bit. Or do you decide, well, I'll just compensate for that and have my default set to 4 kilohertz? But I think essentially the same principles that would apply in the real world, where it's like about keeping your signal chain relatively clear. Um, a good principle, and probably makes a better starting point, rather than thinking, right, I'm going to make a tweak on something which is already quite complex. You know, something like this. You know, this is a Matteo Mancuso preset where we're switching amps between cleans and stuff like that. It's, yeah, I think worth thinking about, maybe, particularly if it's for your own kind of live thing, considering whether maybe you keep something a little bit simpler. That was what I was using in the in the introduction there. No. See what the cab was here. Cali V30 with the 121 ribbon, position 1.8. That's worth a go then, because that sounds, again, really quite simple. We've got a dynamic plate and a reverse delay. Decided, okay, I'm going to tweak with this one from my starting point. You know, choose a distortion which is going to work nicely here. Let's try the prize drive potentially. You know, just because we do have the capability to add loads and loads of blocks and go bonkers with stuff, maybe we kind of get back to that idea. That we are going to take the principle of kind of our normal kind of signal chain type stuff, where if it doesn't need to be complex, we don't need to make it needlessly so. And yeah, just a more simple approach to building presets as a starting point could maybe be beneficial. Particularly, you know, for me, I'm someone who makes a lot of tweaks in the snapshots and stuff like that. And it's something that I think has caught me out a couple of times, and maybe keeping it simple is probably a better starting point than thinking, right, I'm going to change everything per snapshot. could lead us to some kind of more pure, cleaner results, maybe. As well as being easier to figure out what it was that you did in the first place, which is, again, something that has trapped me out before. But it is nice to have that option. For example, here, controller assigned snapshots. I could drop this down and that's one of my main kind of non-negotiables, I guess, be using that high cut in that way to kind of tame some of the higher gain stuff and the fizzy stuff that can start to creep in when we up the gain a bit. I hope that was somewhat interesting, some form. I'll drop this one up into the folder. I don't know what's happened with the other one. It's probably somewhere along here. I can't see it. Crap eyes. I'll catch you in another video soon. I hope that was, I don't know, something to think about. Let me know your most simple presets that work well for you, or do you have some non-negotiables that you always have to have something in there? You know, for me it might be that high cut in the cab block, or for others it might be a compressor at the end of the chain.